Hartford Conservation Commission. And on behalf of the commission, I want to welcome everyone to tonight's meeting on the updated plan for the Hartford Town Forest Resource Management Plan. We also want to thank you, the commission wants to thank you for coming in this evening, coming to the meeting. It's a nice summer's evening out there, and looking at a computer for an hour is not always the nicest way to spend a summer's evening, but thank you for participating. Last fall, the commission started thinking about updating the resource management plan. And as we were doing this, we scheduled a series of outreach meetings, and the first one was supposed to be in May, where we were going to talk about the town forest and give an introduction of what we were trying to do and why we were trying to do it. But of course, the pandemic struck, and it still doesn't look like we don't know when to be able to have public meetings again. So we thought we would experiment and try the electronic meeting. It's been successful for other organizations, so we'll give it a try tonight and see how it goes. So we have 3 parts to the meeting tonight. So for the first 10, maybe 15, John Boughton is going to talk. John's a retired professional forester. He's been a long time Conservation Commission member, and he's going to talk about first background on the town forest, some general background, and then also review what are the reasons we're doing this updated plan and the goals and objectives of the commission. The second part of it will be another presentation by A.J. Follansby. A.J. is a forester with the Vermont Department of Forest Parks and Recreation. He's the Windsor County forester, and he's the guy that's been doing the work on updating the plan. He's basically writing it, and we're following his lead. So AJ will go into more detail. He's done this last winter and spring. He's tromped around the forest a lot and done an inventory. So he's going to talk about his inventory of the town forest, and then go into some of the techniques and ideas that we're thinking about doing for improving the forest. And then the third part, the last 15 minutes or so, or however long it is the most important part to the commission, because that's the question and answer and comment period. So it's critical to the commission that we get public input. So we hope that as the presentations go on, please keep your muted, because we are recording this, so we'll reduce background noise. But you can use the chat function, which is in your bar at the bottom. Push on the chat, and you can type in your question. And Matt Osborne is the host for the meeting, and he'll be reading the chats, and then he'll ask John and AJ questions as they either at the end, or if it's appropriate during their presentations. So Matt, John, and AJ, anything else we should say before we get started? I guess not. So okay, John, take it away.
AJ, so you're going to punch up the first slide, and I'm going to tell you when to push the next one, right?
Yep. Let's see how this goes. I gotta. How's that look? Does that look right?
Woohoo!
Okay.
Hey,
all right.
Thank you. Okay.
Can you make it larger?
Yeah.
Full size?
Yeah.
It looks good to me. Sure. So that's just introductory. This is about the Hartford Town Forest. Go ahead to the next slide, AJ. We've been going through several planning steps here, and it's important just for you to get some sense of where we are. There's been a draft forest management plan. We've been reviewing it. What we wanted to do is we need, as Tom said, we want to hold this public meeting on the town forest, basically to present the scope of this forestry plan and to sort of look at things and collect public thoughts. We had also told the select board that we are going to be holding a second public meeting, and we will be looking at the draft plan and also tree harvesting documents. So it'll be sort of more specific as we go on to it. We had hoped initially to be able to do this so that We could have some operations happening this winter. That's clearly not going to happen at this point in time due to COVID-19. AJ? So the town forest is located really quite centrally, pretty easy to get to. And the town forest is the part that we're talking about today is this left-hand part on the screen. You can see the right-hand part drops down. That's the Hurricane Wildlife Refuge. We actually have dedicated that or had recommended to the Recreation Department that they not do any cutting there, with the goal that eventually that will become looking a lot like old growth forests or mature forests. The left-hand side, the Hartford Town Forest, has a lot of activities on it. It's 423 acres, which is a pretty nice sized chunk of land. AJ? I wanted to sort of point out how this fits in with sort of the larger forest. We really do live in a northeastern forest, live within it. We're very fortunate to have this forest around us, which supports us. That arrow is basically pointing to approximately where the Hartford Town Forest is. And you can see that sort of pale green area, which runs down to the darker green area, is about a 5,000 acre block of forest habitat that is of which the Hartford Town Forest, totaling 565 acres, is only a 10% part of. It's essential, but it all ties together. This is a way in which we actually have it. We have in our town zoning regulations run a wildlife corridor through this patch and connecting with the forest both to the north and to the northwest. This is the place where, as we have climate change, we can expect that species, and I don't mean just animals, this includes bacteria, fungi, all sorts of things, and the forest processes are going to have to adapt and migrate as climate changes. AJ? So our goals generally here are to maintain a healthy, viable forest resource. And when I say that, I don't mean to imply that the forest is only trees. I'm trying to emphasize that the forest is much more complicated than simply the trees. This is an entire working system, a working environment that really is supporting us. Another goal is to protect all the water resources using acceptable management practices. So this is for the benefit of both water quality in general and riparian wildlife habitat protection. And many of these things have sort of multiple benefits. Additionally, we want to be maintaining and enhancing wildlife habitat and habitat connectivity. So again, this is related to potential in terms of climate change. It's also related to not cutting off some of the genetic material that might be mixed up or might be separated if we cut off sections of forest from one another. And so maintaining this diversity is important in our goals. AJ? We also want to develop and maintain multiple use recreation, a network of recreation trails and other users. What this does is not only is it, individual benefits, but it also is allowing people to learn about and understand the forest and how it works, and potentially, which goes into the next use, the educational use, will enable people to do a better job, hopefully, or more thoughtful job of managing their own land. So setting up some areas that are demonstrations of things is something that we would certainly consider doing. We also are really important thinking about the educational values and recreational activities. So the key here is that they be exemplary, and they generally follow the tread lightly guidelines. AJ? Now, in addition to those goals, which are actually forest management plan goals, which have been carried forward now about 20 years, with the new things that are sort of coming up and people are paying attention to, we want to be concerned about enhancing carbon storage and sequestration. How can we do that? How can we contribute to taking carbon out of the atmosphere, and how can we hold it there? And those are goals that are not quite easily in sync, but they're a piece that we want to take a look at. And as I've said a couple times, maintaining wildlife habitat and connectivity related to climate change. AJ. Really quickly, I'm going to skim through this. We've had previous forest management plans. Our Conservation Commission has been managing the town forest for over 20 years now. Have had a couple of forest management plans. We've had 2 small-scale selective timber harvests in the mid-2000s. Our last forest inventory and plan had been last updated in 2011. That was by consulting forester Paul Harwood, who had also put together the previous plan. We have really not acted on that. And so we came to a time, it is 10 years later, it's really time to get a new inventory. Ultimately, we are hoping to pull all of the pieces together between this forestry sort of vegetation management plan and wildlife management plan and recreation plan. So we'll be creating one larger number of guidelines and activities, scheduled activities that we'll be doing in the future. AJ. These are some of those inventories that we've done in the meantime. We've done an amphibian inventory, bird habitat assessment. Amphibians was with the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. The bird habitat assessment was made available to us through Audubon Vermont. The wildlife habitat assessment and bat inventory, we paid for that. We hired Alan Thompson, who is a wildlife biologist, to do that. And we have recreation assessments and plans. The first rec plan was done in 2002. We definitely needed to upgrade, I don't want to say upgrade, we had to modify it in 2018 for several reasons. The uses of the forest was shifting. And we were fortunate enough to be able to get a grant and had a professional landscape architecture firm facilitate putting together an assessment for our parcel, along with 9 others. This was a pilot project in the state of Vermont in 9 other town forests. We are now taking that assessment and we're coming up with some specific guidelines. So there's all this stuff is going on as AJ has been, well, this is what the Conservation Commission is thinking, and we have asked AJ to think about it as he's thinking about what activities we might be doing. AJ? I think I just talked about that. Next one, AJ? Yeah, so the recreation trails, we have pretty good coverage. We definitely want to be working with the people that are out there recreating. This needs to work for everybody. Yeah, so I'll just leave it at that. And hopefully in the process of doing vegetation management, we're going to be creating things that the hikers, the other people who are doing recreation, will be able to benefit from. And we also would expect that there will be some learning opportunities as we go along. And in terms of education, we might very well have some signposts up with some interpretive information and that sort of thing. Again, education we consider to be really important here. AJ. Yeah, so along with putting together that assessment, we were working with the recreation community and decided we were able to get a grant again and hired the Upper Valley Trails Alliance to assess the trail's sustainability and the maintenance needs. Out of that came a very nice, nicely set up combination spreadsheet and GIS, geographic information system, where we can track what's happening at what places on the forest. And we've got notes in places where we can, in a spreadsheet, where we can note where things need to happen. This summer, we hired a Vermont Youth Conservation crew for 2 weeks, and they're in the process of relocating a steep eroding trail, and they're making improvements potentially to other trails. They've been doing a fantastic job of relocating one very steep pitch on what's known as the Pine Drop Trail. Getting it off of some rock and steep pitches and a very interesting trail for us. AJ. So part of the management plan strategy here are some of the strategies are going to be to include, and these are related to adapting to climate change and the wildlife habitat, bird habitat, and carbon storage and sequestration. These are all enhanced by increasing site-appropriate diversity. So I'm talking about diversity of tree species, forest structures. So this is the patchiness. Instead of having a solid overstory of big trees or middle-sized trees or little smaller trees, this patchiness, this what is actually a characteristic of older forests, is that you end up with groups of big trees, groups of middle-sized trees, and groups of smaller trees, and actually groups where trees are sort of getting started all over again. Critical for wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration storage, and for resilience to climate change. We want to be doing education. And we'd also like to be able to highlight some locally grown and processed forest products. Makes little sense to me when we have forests in our own backyard to be harvesting wood and using wood from places where we don't know what the environmental considerations are. I've been to lumber yards where I've seen spruce that was imported from Siberia, as an example, and quite frankly, I just think that's irresponsible when we have wood growing in our own backyards. We shouldn't be exporting our need for wood to other places that should be benefiting from it. We hope we're going to get some income. That's not the driving force here. The driving force here really is all those other benefits of managing the vegetation that I've spoken about. And but any income that we have, we would propose that money go towards the Hartford Conservation Fund. That's a fund that we have that is used for maintaining the town forests and natural areas. And we have also been able to make contributions, minor contributions to individuals who have, and not directly to the individuals. We have helped to facilitate the process of some individuals donating conservation rights to regional land trusts. AJ.
All right. I think it's my turn. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Just a reminder to mute your everybody mute. Just I've got some videos. I don't know how well they're going to hear them, just to make sure everybody's muted so we can hear those videos I have, and hopefully they work. I'm really excited to share with everybody what I found over the winter here at the Hartford Town Forest. I haven't spent much time out there beforehand, but I spent a lot of time out there this winter and got to really know the place pretty well. Pretty well, I guess. Anyway, so we wanted, in doing this, I really wanted to bring the Hartford Town Forest to everybody as best we can without being able to go out in the woods. So I got pictures, I've got videos, I've got as much as I can to highlight some of the cool things that are out there and talk about the forest types that we have at the Hartford Town Forest. So when I always start to work on a parcel, it could be I help with private lands. I'm a county forester, so I help people manage their private lands. When I get questions from people about their lands, I always kind of bring up, when I'm on the phone with them, I try to bring up their parcel just so I can see what we're looking at and talking about it right from the beginning. I started on town forest. I always start with like an aerial photo. So this is the Hartford Town Forest here. This is the whole reservoir. And this is what it looks like now. The cover types look like now. As John said, when we talk Hartford Town Forest, we're talking this side, the western side. That's the part I evaluated and inventoried. I'm going to apologize now if I slip up and say Hurricane Town Forest. I mean the Hartford Town Forest. I don't know what it is. I keep trying to call it that, and I can't help myself, I guess. But I think I do it in some of the videos, and I'll apologize for that. So just looking at this, the red here is the boundary. And first impressions of this is it's mostly forested. We don't have a whole lot of open space. It's all pretty much forested and thick forest cover. We've got the old former reservoirs here. one with a little bit of water in it, one's a little larger and fully drained for the most part. And then we've got the communication tower area, the decommissioned communication tower. But for the most part, it's fully forested. It didn't always used to look like this. During my inventory and other visits, I noticed a lot of past land use history out there. Things like old foundation. This is an old foundation here, and stone walls, barbed wire. The homestead site here, we've got an old apple tree, some invasive plants around that. And I'm standing on here at this picture of the honeysuckle and looking at the apple tree. I'm standing on a barn foundation. So all of these are clues to what the forest used to be used for, what the past land use type was. This was an old farm, years ago. And what this is an aerial photo of the Hartford Town Forest back in 1940, June of 1940. And what we can see here, we see the two reservoirs full of water. Now, something I forgot to mention, I wanted to mention. So the town of Hartford has owned this since 1890. It's the combination of three different farms. The reservoirs were installed around 1900 and provided water for the town until 1950. When the town purchased this, it was probably pretty open. We've got still in this photo here, the lighter grays are more than likely open fields or reverting pasture. So we've got two areas here. The darker colors are conifers, more than likely pine or hemlock. And these lighter grays, those are hardwood cover types. So we've got that here and here. And we've got an open field. And that foundation I found is about where that red dot is. So that was in an open field at one point too. And we can get a sense of how big this field was back 80 years ago. This area is about 5 acres, probably 4 acres when it was full of water. So we're looking at 15 acres here that were in fields at one point. And now, what do these open fields look like now? They're forested. So they're full of early successional species that are starting to decline. We've got our aspen, we've got paper birch. These are all species that come into a site when it's abandoned with some kind of disturbance and try to occupy the site and get it back to forest. So now we've got an area in those open fields on that aerial photo. They now look like this. So that's a little brief land use history on the Hartford Town Forest, and I want to talk more about some of the forest types that can be found out there. The most common forest type is dry red oak white pine forest. It's the most common forest type in the Hartford Town Forest. There's different variations throughout. These sites are typically dry, warm sites. They occur in river valleys. They're pretty common in the White River Valley and the Connecticut River Valley in our area. I see quite a bit of sites like these, particularly when I'm near the White River. These sites normally get established on old fields and tend to be an early successional forest type. And then they tend to succeed and as the forest matures into more a different forest type. And likely what will happen here at the Hartford Town Forest, these sites will tend more to a northern hardwood forest. Common vegetation that you'll find in these forests are red oak and white pine. Sometimes you'll see ironwood here. The understories typically got beech, striped maple, and some blueberries, which I actually found. So I found some blueberries the other day there, some low bush blueberries. The herbaceous layer is generally lacking on these sites. These sites are really good for wildlife. The acorns from the red oaks provide food for black bear, turkeys, deer, gray squirrel, and blue jays. Forest birds you could find in these type of forests are black-throated blue warblers, scarlet tanagers, and ovenbirds. You'll find some mixedwood preferential bird species such as Blackburnian warbler, black-throated green warbler, and you'll find pine warblers that are attracted to the taller, larger pine in these sites. So this is the most common forest type that's on the Hartford Town Forest. Another forest type that can be found is northern hardwood forest. There's not a very big example of a northern hardwood forest here on the Hartford Town Forest, but this is in the state of Vermont. It's our most common forest type. Can be found in all the biophysical regions in the state. This only makes, like I said, only makes up a small portion of the western part of the Hartford Town Forest. The typical tree you'll find in the northern hardwood forest are beech, yellow birch, and maple. But there's many variants of a northern hardwood forest, but that you'll find in the state. These tend to be later successional forest types, meaning that as a forest ages and goes through the different successional stages, they'll tend to get this kind of northern hardwood forest type in it as the forest matures. A lot of long-lived perennials are common in the understory. Plants like trout lily, spring beauty, and red trillium can all be found blooming in early spring in these forest types. The wildlife, there's a variety of wildlife that will use the northern hardwood forest. They provide a lot of interior forest habitat, but there's variants on, sometimes these are early successional, found when they're younger, so you get different kind of use then too. But some of the forest birds you could hear in a northern hardwood forest are black-throated blue warblers, scarlet tanagers, and you might see a northern goshawk. Because these make up such a big portion of the state, this type of forest, black bear can be found in northern hardwood forest types. One cool thing about the example of a northern hardwood type on the Hartford Town Forest is I think it has a chance to become an old growth forest. Really, there isn't much evidence of any treatments being done here in the past 50 years at least. We don't have a whole lot of old growth forests in Vermont. They provide a lot of ecological services and wildlife habitat, and getting a local example of an old growth forest would be great to have. The area we're talking is probably 20 acres. That's a true northern hardwood forest type. The last forest type I'd like to highlight is a hemlock forest. These hemlock forests that are found in the Hartford Town Forest are generally small pockets of dense hemlock. And that's typical throughout Vermont. They're usually not huge stands of hemlock. They're generally found within different types of a forest type. So you might have a northern hardwood forest with little pockets of hemlock. You'll find them around riparian areas, steep cliff areas. And that's where you'll find a lot of the hemlock in the Hartford Town Forest is along the riparian streams that are draining the former reservoirs. The hemlock forest tends to be a late successional forest. Hemlock is a long-lived, shade-tolerant tree that can live up to 1,000 years. Usually, these forests, it's mostly hemlock. You'll get 75 to 80% hemlock, but you'll have a mixture of other trees, typically hardwoods. You'll have sugar maple, red maple, yellow birch in here, mixed in with this kind of forest. Hemlock forests have a ton of wildlife habitat benefits, and some of the birds you might find in a hemlock forest, there's a saw-wheat owl, red-breasted nuthatch, black Burnian warbler, black-throated green warbler. Another huge benefit for hemlock forest is the deer wintering value they have. So these hemlock forests tend to have a dense canopy cover, which means they don't have as much snow usually in the winter. So deer, when it's really cold, on the coldest winter days, will come in these forests and they'll bed and sleep. And they retain heat a little better because of the low boughs and the conifer cover. These areas are so important that the Vermont Fish and Wildlife map these areas of deer wintering and hemlock cover, but there's none. They haven't mapped any on the Hartford Town Forest, but there's definitely deer wintering in these hemlock forests out there, the Hartford Town Forest. All right, so the next couple slides are going to be videos and pictures of some of the highlights of the Hartford Town Forest, some things I'd like to just point out. There's plenty of things to point out. I had to pick some of the few that I had, and we'll see if these videos work. Just north of the parking area and landing site is this large open area. It's about 5 acres in size. This was a former reservoir that was drained completely, just about. There's a bit of water just where the old dam used to be, but for the most part, it's completely drained of water. This area is providing all sorts of different wildlife habitat benefits. There's young forests there in the form of the young pine that's growing in around the larger pines in the background there. There's forbs. There's grasses. Those will be used by different types of birds. There's cover in here for
for deer in the shape of those young trees. So areas like this are really important, and if we can keep these areas in this sort of perpetual state of regrowth, it'll have a lot of benefit for the wildlife using the Hartford Town Forest.
So this is a video John took of me. I'm standing right there, so that gives you a sense of how big 5 acres is, and you can look at the get a better look at the young pine that are coming up here, and a decision will have to be made as to what to do with this young growth in these trees. If allowed to mature, these will turn into a mature forest. The benefits that I mentioned in the video of having it in a state of young growth will eventually be lost as this area gets occupied by trees. So a choice will have to be made. Do we knock these trees back? Do we brush hog it? Do we keep it in this state of young growth for all the benefits to wildlife? And that's something that will have to be decided. Let's see if I name this right. I think I might have got it backwards. I don't know. So the other reservoir is what maybe the slide should say. Looks like this. It's a close-up view. It's got water in it. If you've walked your dog in there, I'm sure they probably swam in that pond. It's probably the most prominent water feature on the property. And the pine that are here are this big. So it's John standing next to this young pine growth, and it's not that old, really. 5-10 years old, something like that, and they're really growing fast. And again, another choice, we'll have to decide what to do with this young growth. Do we let it mature and become a large forest filled with large trees, or do we keep it in the state of young shrubbiness and keep all the values there? So that's something that has to be decided. All right, so we've got some riparian areas out there. This water here is going to eventually flow pretty short distance before it gets in the Connecticut River. Anything we do here in the Hartford Town Forest is going to affect the water quality down the watershed of the Connecticut River, anything south of here. So it's really important to leave areas like this pretty much alone and intact as much as possible. We call these areas riparian areas. There's certain regulations and laws for logging that restrict what we can even do in here, and anything we would do would go above and beyond that. I'm going to pan over here. There's a road, a historic road here that's really close to this stream, and it could have been used, and it probably was used for harvesting. This is something we would not be using for any kind of logging. It's way too close to this stream. You're going to get a lot of runoff. Particularly here, we're feet away from this stream here in the road. So you're going to get skidders. If we were to use this, skidders and whatever we were using to haul the wood would be running up and down this road. And no matter how good we are at planning our roads, we're going to get some mud. And we get a rainstorm or anything like that, that's a very short distance for the mud here on this road to flow right here into the stream. And that's what we call a discharge. And we don't want to be discharging into any waters here in the Hurricane Town Forest or in the state of Vermont. It's actually illegal to do so. So this is a historic road that's good for enjoying the forest, walking and recreating on, but we would now, anything in the future, we wouldn't use this road. There are wetlands out there. There's actual forested wetlands. There's vernal pools. This is a picture of a vernal pool with some egg masses in it. This is a view of a forested wetland in the winter. And I'll talk a little bit in these videos. Here in the southern part of the Hartford Town Forest, there's a wetland, a forested wetland or seep. It's not a very big area, but this is a very important area for wildlife to come and get a drink of water in the wintertime. This is an area that won't have much snow or ice on top of it because of the groundwater warmth.
This area has been harvested in the past. There's evidence of cutting all around this area, but there's very little evidence of impact to this wetland, so the machines likely didn't travel through here. In the northwestern part of the Hartford Town Forest, there's another forested wetland. Unlike the one in the southern part of the property, this one has been left more or less alone. There's not much evidence of harvesting near it. Trees have been allowed to just fall in place into the wetland, which provides great habitat for amphibians that lay their eggs in these areas. It doesn't look very wet now, but I can tell you in the early spring and wet summers, this is probably full of water here.
So those are some of the wetlands out there. So those are some of the highlights. There's plenty more to talk about, but I only have a limited amount of time. So those are just a few of the non-forested things, tree and forest management things that are out in the Hartford Town Forest. And so with that, I'm going to shift a little bit into forest management and kind of what I found out there for historical use, kind of some of the ideas we're having going forward. Nothing's been really decided. I wrote a plan. It's in a draft right now, and we're kind of batting around ideas, trying to figure out what to do out there. And so the way to do that, first thing you do as a forest manager is kind of split up that big old green map I showed you before into management units or stands. And that's what I've done here. So the white areas here are the stand boundaries, and I've split this into the forest into 5 different stands. And that was the reason for the 5 stands is that's what Paul Harwood did when he wrote the plan in 2008. And I wanted to keep more or less the same boundary to compare data. The way that they were grouped initially, they were initially grouped more towards forest operations and how you would manage those stands. And I should say a stand is a group of trees with like characteristics, and they can be forest similar trees, topography, operations. And that's what I'm talking about when I mentioned stands. So we've got 5 stands out there. I've mentioned the northern hardwood area. From here, it's about right there. And that the first video I showed was from here, looking that way. I was talking about the trail and the stream right here to give you a sense of what we're looking at. That foundation is right there. The other forested wetlands here that I mentioned in the other videos, just to give you kind of a sense of where we are. So I'm just to briefly mention this. It's a working forest. There has been in the past. The Hartford Town Forest is a working forest, and a working forest, when you boil it down to it, it's an actively managed forest that generates revenue. That's very simply said, but there's more to it. The forest management has to be sustainable. If you're going to want to generate revenue or have some income from forest, you can't just completely wipe out the forest and get all your money all at once, because you won't have anything for 80, 100 years. So you got to do it methodically, sustainably, to get so it's constantly working and providing some income and resource and protect the ecological service that the forest provides. A lot of Vermont's forests are working forests. If you're enrolled in the current use program or UVA, you are in a working forest program. So it's historically been used as that. There's been these periodic timber sales, and that's kind of what we're thinking about continuing here. And when we're talking about forest management, there are really 2 methods that we talk about for treatment: silvicultural prescriptions. There's even age management and uneven age management. Even age management is what was done for years out at the Hartford Town Forest. None of these pictures are from the Hartford Town Forest. These are from other areas in our region. But so even age management, it was done as early as the 1950s. They were thinning, they were clearing, things like that, patch cuts. In the 80s, we had a lot of even age management done at the Hartford Town Forest, and then we shifted gears to uneven age management, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But even age management, you are managing one group of trees throughout its whole life cycle. And eventually, you're going to have to regenerate it, either by removing the overstory completely or by trying to do some kind of seed regeneration treatment. And that's what this is a picture of. This is more of a shelter wood treatment. These trees are dumping seed on the understory. Once that seed gets established and you've got tree regeneration, the thought is we'll remove all these pine, and you'll have something that looks like this. The other method would be you have a group of trees, however big, a stand, something like that, and you clear cut it. And that's what this is a picture of. The thought is to eventually get a group of trees established again after you've gone through your cutting cycle, and you're going to just be focused on that age class throughout the cycle, rotation cycle. Here's some evidence of the past even age management that was done. John standing next to a stump from probably the 1980s when they had a lot of pretty heavy even age management done. They thinned this out almost to shelterwood or seed tree level and retain these pine that are in the background here. Tom standing next to some 30-year-old maple that came up because of that treatment. So now we have 2 age classes here. And the thought would be eventually, if we kept with that even age management, we would remove all the pine and then we'd start managing the red maple that are here. Just another picture of John standing next to that reservoir, just to give you another idea of the age class. So this is one age class that all got established at the same time, and that even age management would focus on growing and managing just this one age class and wouldn't think about regeneration or any other species going forward. Benefits to even age management. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in this video.
Some of the healthiest and nicest quality pines are found in the very western part of the Hartford Town Forest, located in Stand 1. This didn't happen by accident. This area has been actively managed in the past. You can see by the many stumps here, this area has been actively managed. And these pines may not look good in big in the video, but I'll tell you, they're very, very tall and large. You can see that in the stump here in the background. We've got this very large tree here. There are many stumps here, and these are different age treatments here. We've got these smaller, more decomposed stumps here. That's a different treatment than what was done in the early 2000s, and we've got evidence of that early 2000s treatment right there. That stump is not as decomposed as the other. So this area has seen many different treatments in the past, and you can see the benefits of active management here. To try to give you some scale of what this looks like, I've hung my hat in that pine. And that's a very tall and large pine with a very healthy crown. It's some of the healthiest crowned pines on the property here.
Those pines were thinned over the years, over 2 different treatments, and now we've got this very large pine that I mentioned in the video, and we've got the understory of hemlock that's gotten established after those treatments, and now we've got a 2H stand. So that's kind of the benefits of active management. You get the payoff here with this really nice crowned large pine. Those are the benefits of actively managing your woodlot. So that's even age management. I'm going to talk about uneven age management. And this is the shift that took place in the late 90s. So the past 2 forest management plan prescribed more uneven age management. And that's what I'm prescribing in my management plan as well, is uneven age treatments. Uneven age management, you're looking at stands that are uneven age. You're trying to have a stand with 3 different distinct age classes. So 3 different ages of trees. This kind of management mimics more natural disturbance regimes. Your most common treatments you'll have in an uneven age management system are single tree selection and group selection. So just to kind of visualize that a little bit, what I'm talking about with 3 different age classes. So here we've got regeneration in this understory, and we've got this overstory. That's 2 ages. It's going on to 3. It'll get there eventually. This here was a single tree selection / small group where they're trying to get another age class established. They've got this larger hardwood here. That's 1 age class. They've got these smaller saplings here. That'll be another age class. And then the thought is this group will now regenerate with a 3rd age class. So that's what we're trying to get at. We're trying to get at least 3 age classes with these treatments. There's past uneven age management done out there, and this is more recent. The cutting has been more recent.
Here's an example of some uneven age management taking place. This is more of a single tree selection treatment. You can see the stump there. 1 tree was taken while most of the rest here were left. This resulted in some regeneration getting established there in the form of that beech regeneration behind the stump. It also opened up the canopy a bit, which is a little hard to tell with the leaves on. But these trees that were retained in the overstory at the time of release have more growing space. And as you can tell, starting to get a little bit tighter there for competition in the crowns.
Yeah, so these trees are starting to now compete again for light resources. Now that after they've been thinned, it's been probably 15 years since that tree's been taking that. I started with that stump. There's also some groups out there, and I'm going to let John talk about the groups.
So here's a patch that was cut about 20 years ago by the Hartford Technical Center. They have a natural resources program. And the idea here was to create an opening, and this is a fairly small opening, left large trees around the outside, especially left a big red oak tree to throw some seed around. And the regeneration here has become ferns, which have kind of kept things down, and this is a ground layer. And we're beginning to develop a mid layer of hemlock. We also have a little striped maple, some birches, and some white pines. But this is the kind of diversity that we can create by creating patches.
Ready.
So this is a section that was, a patch was created about 20 years ago by the Hartford Technical Center. The goal here was to create some diversity and some wildlife habitat. At the same time, it was very successful in getting some young trees to get started. This is something that we could be doing in town forests or any piece of property where we wanted to get additional trees growing. We wanted to get them smaller. You can see that these white pines and the deciduous trees are moving right up into this opening. They're young trees, they're only 20 years old, surrounded by trees that are 80 to 100 years old. And that's how we create some diversity, and it's how we create some continuation of having younger trees coming along, so when these older trees die and fall over, we have something that's coming up to replace it.
This is a group that was cut about 15 years ago. The size of the group is roughly half the size of the largest trees. This cut resulted in a flush of new regeneration that's roughly 15 years old. There's some beech here along the skid trail that's providing great structure for forest birds and other wildlife. We've got some white pine coming up in this group here. This is really good future growth that we could be able to manage. And we're gonna have 3 age classes in this stand. We've got this younger stuff that's 15 years old. We've got this growth that John's standing next to that's roughly 35 years old. That was from the previous cutting done in the 1980s. And then we've got the large overstory that's in the foreground behind John. That gives us 3 age classes that we'll be able to manage in the future.
So those are examples of past uneven age management that has taken place at the Hartford Town Forest. There are some areas that we found in the development of the forest management plan that would benefit from future uneven age management. There's an area in particular that we're pretty excited about. It's roughly 2 to 5 acres. It's an area we can manage for early successional habitat. And I'll let John describe that area a little bit more in this video.
Section of the forest here that's just on the other side of the lower reservoir. And looking at the old maps from the 1940s, we believe that this is part of what was an old pasture at that point in time. So we have 80-year-old stand of trees here. And this is a poplar tree that's in front of me. Interesting, when poplars start to get old, because they're early succession trees, they pop up, they go up in a hurry, create some shade, allow other trees to get started, and then they fall out of the picture. And you can see behind me is another poplar, which has already died, it's fallen down. That's the demise, or that's the ending of all of these trees. Now the other interesting thing about poplars is that they sprout. They can sprout prolifically. So if we cut these during the dormant season, the fall or the winter, then they will send up lots and lots of new shoots out of the root system. And we can form a really dense mat of vertical stems in here with that, which is ideal for some species. It's absolutely critical for species like grouse. Because the little grouse can kind of run around in those vertical stems, and the hawks can't fly through them. The structure's such that they just can't get to them. So we were thinking about cutting down all of these poplars at the appropriate time, allowing them to sprout, and leaving things like this red oak, which is about the same age, but that's a spectacular tree. It's very nice either from a lumber standpoint eventually, or from a wildlife habitat standpoint. The number of acorns this tree is going to produce in its lifetime over the next 30, 40, 50, or longer years will be sustaining wildlife for a long time. But that doesn't mean that we're going to do just a solid remove everything in the area. So we talked about taking out the poplar trees, but we also have some areas that are sort of more patchy like this with the smaller diameter trees. We might very well go right around these and leave them behind. So this leaves us with a second class of trees. So we can envision that in maybe 20 years, we would have a very dense, thick stand that's beginning to look a little bit like this. And then these trees will be in this category, and then the oak trees are going to be more like this. So we've created those 3 age classes in here and provided a new habitat that would not be here if we don't do something.
I'm going to talk just briefly about the challenges that are out at the Hartford Town Forest to management in general, forest management or otherwise. So this video, I'm pointing out some of the heavily browsed beech. So every one of these little, where I put my finger on here, those are areas where that beech has been clipped off by deer and eaten. Problem with this, it's not good for the beech, but also if they're eating beech, they've eaten all their other hardwoods that they would prefer. So there's like a hierarchy of trees that deer will eat. And it doesn't start with beech. Beech is pretty low on the list. So they're looking for your oak, your maple, birch, or ash. So what this tells me, seeing that heavily browsed beech, and that's common in a lot of the parcel, a lot of my notes said heavily browsed beech throughout my inventory. That tells me that there's a high deer pressure, and they don't have the right kind of tree species to be feeding on. So some of these groups, larger groups that we're thinking about doing, will get a new flush of growth. Hopefully, we'll give some cover and food to deer, and hopefully we'll get some other trees to come up out of that. They won't browse at all. I propose maybe applying for a deer fence in some areas where we really want to try to get the regeneration going, and that can be done through my department. So this video is just talking about the landing site.
Centrally located in the Hartford Town Forest is the landing site. This landing has been used historically in past logging operations. There are some challenges posed with using this landing site in future operations. This landing has been reduced a bit to accommodate parking just beyond this opening here. Modern day equipment is a little larger than what has been used here in the past, and the use of that equipment will require this landing be expanded.
Another challenge at the Hartford Town Forest are invasive plants. The Conservation Commission has done a really good job at controlling the invasive plants at the Hartford Town Forest, but there are a few, and I'll discuss that a little bit in this video.
One thing you don't see a lot of here at the Hartford Town Forest are invasive plants. The Hartford Conservation Commission has done a really good job at controlling the invasive plants that were present on the property as a whole, the watershed, and here on the town forest. This here is a mature honeysuckle, and you can see it's loaded with berries, and that's one thing that makes these invasive plants invasive. They're prolific seeders. So what happens is a bird will come in, take one of these berries, and they spread it throughout, and these berries have lots and lots of seeds within them that get spread after the bird comes in and eats them. So it's one thing, and I know this is on the list for the Conservation Commission to control this, but I want to point this out. So this will be important to remove this plant because right now it will spread further in the forest, and particularly being so close to the open area, it'll be important to remove this plant.
Okay, so this is the other challenge to forest management in general are invasive, are tree pests, some of them native, some of them not. In the Hartford Town Forest in particular, the thing that really stood out to me were some of the pine in some of the stands were really looked to be in not the best health. They looked to be being affected by white pine needle cast, which is a fungal pathogen which affects the needles of the tree. And what it does, it makes the white pine tree drop last year's needles. Usually happens in June. If you notice this June, really brown looking, sickly looking pine, that's white pine needle cast. And this picture here is a picture of a pine looking up and with a thin crown. There should be 5 3 sets of needles on there and only has 1. Healthy pine will have 3 years worth of needles on it. There's red rot out there. This is a fungal fruiting body of red rot. They're usually not this big, but that's a common pest for our softwood species. The biggest concern for Vermont forests, and the thing that's going to make the biggest change to our forest, is emerald ash borer. And what this is a map of the infestations that are in Vermont. We found emerald ash borer 2 years ago here in Plainfield. Seems like every 3 months we find a new infestation. And that's what all these red dots are. So the center of these red dots are where we found, or red circles is where we found a emerald ash borer. And what my department does is we consider the point where they're found, we give it 5-mile radius on top of that, and we consider that area to have emerald ash borer. We may not have found it in every spot in that area, but it's considered infected. The yellow thing is another 5 miles on top of the red, and that's a high risk area. So that's an area we're concerned about emerald ash borer moving into quite soon. This is concerning for Hartford Town Forest because where my red dot is there, that's where the Hartford Town Forest is, and we've got an infestation in Plainfield, New Hampshire. We're within a high-risk area. The good thing about the Hartford Town Forest is there's not a lot of ash out there. That northern hardwood forest that I touched on earlier, that's where all the ash is, and there's still not even a lot in the composition of that area. So it will affect the ash trees for sure in the Hartford Town Forest, but it won't have such a devastating effect overall because the ash component is relatively low. One thing I would suggest is to think about removing ash trees along highly used trails. Remove them now while they're alive, and we can do that during an operation, or we could have maybe the Hartford Votech or somebody else remove those ash trees that are along high used trails, because we can assume the ash borer is going to come and kill those trees. We don't want trees along the trails. Okay, almost done. Sorry, this has gone long. So the big thing here, the big picture thing here is this is your forest. It's not mine. I get really excited and really excited when I work on town forest. That no matter where the town forest is, I always find something that I really love about the town forest. So I hope to share my enthusiasm and excitement with you and to help you manage your forest. But really, it's the community's forest, and the Conservation Commission needs to hear from you. We need to hear what you want done with your forest, how you would like to see management done. Input is definitely needed. And with that, that's over. And I'm sorry I went so long, and I'm sorry about the videos not working. But that's all I have.
So it's sort of a learning experience. I don't know whether there have been any written questions, but I guess I would ask if anybody's got a question, and can Tom or Matt unmute people in general, and I would say go ahead and ask away.
Well, well, if there would be logging, where would we think you want to kind of show where the logging might be, AJ, on one of the maps or something, where we're considering it?
I can go
what
back.
Area of the forest?
Yeah, and I, as I mentioned, we haven't made any final decisions, but there's definitely areas that, in my opinion, maybe should be treated first. Those are the areas. I got to go back to the stand map, but those are the areas.
Right. Go back there.
There we go. Oh, did I go too far? I went too far. So the pine that I mentioned kind of looked kind of sickly, not in the best health. Those are in this area here. And if we want to capture the value of that pine, which I think is something that is not, we should not be thinking about. Those are really, there's a lot of volume. They're very large trees. And there is revenue that could be found in there, in those pine, if that's the way we want to go. They're all here. These are where the really kind of sickly looking pine are. I'm a little worried that some of them are not going to be around much longer due to that crown loss that we're seeing from needle cast and the red rot that's within them. And just to give you another, that the video you couldn't hear, me looking at the pine and pointing at stumps, was right here. That's where the really healthy pine are here, and those were more actively managed. I think I'm going on too long, but this area was a little denser to pine, and I think it was left a little denser to pine, maybe too long, and that's why we're seeing some decline. It could be site related too. Anyways,
So it would be.
I was going to sort of pitch in, if I might. I remember you mentioning that you thought that there was a possibility that if we give those crowns of those pine trees some more room, that because the fungus really needs to have a moist environment to have the spores infect the needles, that might help to reduce the infection rate of the trees that are remaining, having good air drainage there.
Yes. Yep. No, I think that's definitely been proven to make a difference. I think anything we do in any of the pine area in this area, in these areas here, would almost be the last treatment we would do with the pine. And I think we would grab the ones that look the worst, release some of the better ones, and I think we would just let the remainder, we call it like the retained trees, the residual pine, just to live out their lives. They're sequestering a lot of carbon. They're storing carbon. And I think we would just let them be really cool, big, awesome pine trees. So I think kind of the last treatment we would probably do out there, and like you said, it might help with the fungus. And another thing I forgot to mention too, so the patch is something I think we should consider. That would be in this area here where John was narrating that video talking about the aspen. That would get us at the goals laid out in the wildlife plan. Both the Audubon, Vermont, and the wildlife assessment done by Alan Thompson suggests that we should shoot for a certain percent of the forest in a young state. And I got the plan here, and I can get that percentage. But getting that 5-acre area would be close.
I think it's important to mention that these open areas or semi-open areas don't need to be static. So it's not a question of creating a mowed area and then going back and mowing it as it becomes brushy. But these sort of newly regenerated areas can sort of bounce around in different parts of the forest. The forests are clearly not static. They're changing and growing all the time.
Okay. Well, I guess you do on the last slide. We do have the draft inventory up for available on the website, the Town Forest website for perusal and any input. Matt, we have a forum if people wanted to give comments. So the draft plan, which is basically the inventory, is there, and you can just Google. If you just Google Hartford Town Forest management plan, you get to the link. That's how I usually do it. And we're asking for comments by the end of August if anybody has any.
Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead.
I'd just like to thank you for putting this together. It's really, really interesting. I haven't seen one of these before.
Thank you. And you can any other if your questions, just call Matt Osborne is our the town planner and the Conservation Commission's liaison. So for sure, always feel free. Matt's email and telephone number, and he'll get in touch with whichever one of us is needed to answer any questions. We don't need to drag this on. Any parting words by anybody?
I'll mention I'd like to do more of these. We'll work out the kinks and try to do some more virtual outreach here before we do any kind of management out there. And we'll try to do some walks in the future when the pandemic's over. And really want people's input and get people involved. So I will try. I think we're going to try to do maybe some more of these on different topics, maybe in the future.
Thanks. I think this for
Sam?
an amazing resource. We're really lucky to have it, and take the care of it quite seriously. It's important, and glad that you're showing up and helping us to make some decisions about the future of this place.
Okay, well, that's it. Thanks everybody for hanging in there, and let us know if you have any questions or comments. And enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Bye.